Okay, Council, we're ready whenever you are.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I will call this special council meeting to order. We're going to have a discussion today about the campground, this being Tuesday, May 5th. Begin by notification to members of the public, staff, presenters, and members of council that please be advised that meetings are broadcast and recorded and made available on the internet. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest? I do not see any. Okay, just before we get to our deputation, I just want to make a couple of comments. So we've got a 2-hour block here of time. The way we're going to use this is I'm going to invite our consultants to make a presentation. I'm then going to ask the ward councillor for Lakefield to make comments and ask questions. I'll then move on to the deputy mayor and then on to councillors Heron and Ballantyne. When we've completed that part, we will then go to the next part of the agenda, which is question period. There have been a number of questions that have been submitted. That's a 15-minute period. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can in the 15 minutes. I assure anybody, if we can't get to your question, then you will get your own written response that will be forwarded to you, although it is my hope that I can get through all of those questions. And just to let people know, and I'm going to quote, I've never done this before in a council meeting, but I'm going to quote Winston Churchill. So today's meeting is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. It may be the end of the beginning. So this is a wide-ranging consultation process, of which this meeting today is one component of that. And so we are going to be going through quite a bit of consultation and discussion as council works to gain and gather the information it needs to make a decision. So having said that and outlined how we're going to operate today, I am going to call on our consultants to make their presentation. I'm going to ask you to go through your presentation in its entirety, and then I'm going to turn it over to the councillors for the questions. So, Anand, are you going to lead this?
Okay. Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. And your quote leading up, very apt. It's absolutely correct. And we would reinforce the fact that, this is, one of the early steps in the process. And so I'll just share my screen. Before I do so, I will also point out Todd Brown and Kent McVitie of our firm are both joining me on the call and available to respond to questions as they see fit as well, based on what we hear from council. So I'm just pulling up the presentation and okay, excellent. So if for some reason somebody can't hear me, please, or see the screen, please do let me know. But thank you once again, Mr. Mayor and members of council, for convening this meeting to discuss the Lakefield Campground Utilization Study. Our presentation is approximately 20 minutes, through which we'll present an update to council of our findings from research and consultations, along with a preliminary analysis of the options being investigated through the study. So the Lakefield Campground Utilization Study is intended to provide Township Council and staff with a recommended operating model pertaining to the Lakefield Campground. It builds on the service delivery review for the Parks and Recreation Department that identified 5 options for the municipality to consider for the campground, that being the status quo, seeking interest through a competitive bid process, pursuing an agreement with the Conservation Authority. The 4th option was to have the Parks and Recreation Department assume operations. And finally, the 5th option was to cease campground operations and repurpose the land. Of the 5 options in that service delivery review, the status quo option is no longer applicable, as the township has provided notice that it won't be renewing the current agreement, but the current operator would still be able to submit a bid as part of a competitive market tender if the township were to proceed with that course of action. Just a little bit about Hague Point. It's situated in between the Autonomy River and the Lakefield Marsh. In addition to the campground, Hague Point contains the Lakefield Beach, Douglas Sports Park and a small residential component, as well as a portion of Imagine the Marsh conservation lands. It's important to note that Douglas Sports Park, Lakefield Beach, those are distinct and separate components from the campground lines, but collectively they make up Hague Point. Of note, the Peterborough County official plan denotes the lands at Hague Point as a special policy area through which a municipally owned campground is a permitted use under the recreational open space designation. That land use also permits other public park and recreational uses to take place. The project was initiated this past February, and a number of research and consultation tasks have been completed. Based on that information, we have prepared a preliminary SWOT analysis, which we will present to Council today for your feedback. As a reminder, the timing of this study was established in anticipation of the current operating agreement coming to an end in October 2022, in order to leave sufficient time to investigate and implement the operating model that is ultimately chosen. Our next steps will be to refine the SWOT analysis into the draft campground study and provide an update back to you before initiating another commenting opportunity for project stakeholders and the public. The Lakefield Campground has a total of 128 sites, though there is also space for overflow sites. The campground's electrical and water infrastructure was installed about 45 years ago, and certain components are in need of replacement. The township received between $53,000 and $62,000 from the campground operator prior to the pandemic, though a portion of these revenues were used to offset costs such as assisting with startup and winterization activities under the terms of that operating agreement. And while we do not know exactly how much Lakefield Campground users directly contribute to the local economy, our discussions with the Chamber of Commerce, the Kawartha Chamber of Commerce, and campers suggest that money is being spent by campers locally on items such as food, fuel, supplies, entertainment, and other services. Our research points to growth in the camping industry at the national, provincial, and regional levels. Industry reports and trends papers point to more people trying out camping in recent years, including culturally diverse populations, millennials, and families with young children. COVID-19 certainly has resulted in a surge of interest, with many campgrounds already having waiting lists for the upcoming summer. But temporary closure of the provincial park campgrounds is expected to drive demand to other operators. It does bear noting that the Lakefield Campground is one of hundreds of municipally owned campgrounds across Canada, and thus the township is not alone in providing this level of service. I'm sorry, it looks like can everyone still hear me? My computer, oh, there we go. My computer temporarily froze. The following slides will provide an overview of the 4 options that are being evaluated through the study. Again, noting that the status quo option is no longer applicable, but it could be considered similar to the competitive bid. The options can be categorized into 2 major decision points. The first being that the township continues to keep the Lakefield Campground, in which case the operating model can be segmented into outsourcing operations or having the township take on day-to-day management. Those would be through options 1 through 3. The other key decision point would be to stop providing the campground, in which case option 4 would apply.
Just to interrupt you, and I think that your slide deck isn't advancing. So.
Okay, so you're not seeing option 1 on your screen right now?
Well, I still have national and provincial outlook on my screen.
Okay, maybe what I'll do is I'll stop the share. I apologize. It is advancing on my screen, and I will.
I'll share. It's Tanya here. Pardon me.
Yep.
I'll share on my end. We'll see if that makes any better, and you can just let me know when you want to advance.
Okay, that sounds good, Tanya. Sorry, I'll just bring my screen back up and. Okay, so I'm on, the option 1 slide, Tanya, is where I'm gonna go from here. The competitive bid option is similar to-
Just give it a minute and let Tanya bring it up, okay?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just give it a minute and let her bring it up.
Yeah, I've closed out of the Zoom window, but hopefully.
I'll let you know when it's up.
Okay.
Okay, my apology. Sorry, my apologies. Doesn't look like I have the most recent presentation.
Okay, I think Angie does. I see her on the line.
Sorry about that. Anit, can you send it along? I think there was a last minute change and I didn't get the most up to date one.
Okay, it was with respect to just a color, but it should be the same. I will, well, what I can do is I'll just try to share my screen one more time. Council, can you see my screen at the moment
Yes.
by doing this?
Yep.
Yeah?
You're on option 1, competitive bid now. There
Okay, so you can see that?
Now we can, yep.
Okay, perfect. So what I will do then, so again, please, Mr. Mayor, if for some reason this falters again, please do let me know. But just for the interest of time, I'll keep going with this. So the competitive bid option is similar to the model that's been employed over the past 25 years, but it really does provide an opportunity to start fresh in many respects with a new agreement that encompasses the township's current values and expectations. Under this option, the township would issue a request for proposal or an expression of interest to seek private sector interest in operating the campground in a manner that is consistent with your desired outcomes. An agreement would need to be crafted that defines provisions such as operating and maintenance responsibilities, compensation structure, compliance with environmental regulations and municipal bylaws, and more. Hopefully you can now see slide number or option number 2. Thank you, Councillor Ballantyne, for the nod. Orca presently operates the Warsaw Caves and Beavermead campgrounds, the latter of which is owned by the city of Peterborough, and indications are that the agreement has worked well for all parties while providing benefits to Peterborough residents and businesses. Peterborough approached Orca, who could operate the campground at a lower cost, and that resulted in a partnership that retains a level of service while providing operating revenues to both public institutions. An operating agreement containing many of the same provisions discussed in the last slide would need to be developed if this option were to be pursued. So now I'm on to the slide on option number 3, in which case the Parks and Recreation Department would assume day-to-day management of the campground. This would result in an operating model that is similar to the township's arenas, community centers, and sports fields. So as such, management of the campground would require the Parks and Recreation Department and possibly other departments to be responsible for customer service, bookings and payment, monitoring business performance, enforcement, and regular maintenance. Some of these resources might be shared with existing staff that are already assigned to parks or arena operations. Option 4 would be implemented if the township no longer wishes to operate the Lakefield campground, potentially on the basis that it determines there is a higher and better use for the land. In this case, the township would need to decommission the site and repurpose it based on a vision and design that would need to be explored through future planning exercises. The following slides will summarize what we have. So now I'm on the summary of consultations. The following slides of which will summarize what we've heard through the community survey, the workshops with PRAC, the Trails Committee, and EDBC, as well as interviews with a number of stakeholders. We will also discuss some points that we have learned through discussions with other municipalities that operate a campground, which we undertook specifically for this study. It is important to note that each consultation technique is a distinct tool, and feedback should be viewed in conjunction with other consultation initiatives and other study inputs. As a reminder as well, any person wishing to provide comments specific to the draft campground study will be able to do so prior to the study coming back to council for consideration. So with respect to our community survey, a total of 1,311 surveys were received over the 4-week period that the survey was active. More than 1,000 of those survey responses were submitted by Selwyn residents, of whom those residents, 77% live in or near Lakefield. Given that camping is an existing service provided by the township, the survey explored the degree to which people camp. It found that 65% take more than 2 camping trips in a year, while about 1 in 3 respondents either do not camp or are infrequent campers. To better understand future plans, the survey found that 69% plan to camp the same or more after the pandemic. So that is consistent with the broader trends we were referencing earlier, while 31% plan to camp less or not camp at all. The survey also specifically asked whether people used the Lakefield campground, of which 71% have visited it in the past 2 years. Over half of respondents used the campground to visit a camper, while the rest report that they primarily used the broader area of Hague Point for walking, use of the beach, and to enjoy the outdoors. The survey also asked whether respondents would support retaining the campground or converting it to parkland. The pie chart on the right-hand side of the screen shows that 54% of the sample supports retaining campground operations in some form, while 43% would like the entire campground to be converted to parkland. For people that supported converting all or a portion of the area to parkland, the vast majority indicated that their vision would be for passive uses with trails and natural areas. The survey also tested levels of support and opposition for each of the study options being investigated. Between 24 and 28% supported retaining a campground and appear to favor private sector or township managed operations. By comparison, 35% would support a decision to not operate a campground. A number of themes raised by the advisory committees. So again, Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, Trails Committee, and Economic Development and Business Committee. Some of the themes raised by them included the Orca option was seen by a number of people as representing a compromise between those wishing for the campground to continue and those that would like greater focus on the environment. People noted that even if proceeding with option 4, the degree of impact on the lands would still need to be evaluated based on the type of park and the type of park facilities that would ultimately be provided. And opinions were mixed as to whether conversion to parkland would result in more or less use of Hague Point. Again, some of that would be dictated by that future vision of the area. In terms of our feedback from local stakeholders, so as we alluded to earlier, we met with a number of groups over the past couple of weeks. A couple of stakeholder groups firmly believe that campground operations should cease and that the land be used to provide a nature-based park experience. 2 different organizations indicated that they would like the campground to remain and are willing to work with others to find common ground so that both types of uses can coexist. Interestingly, the perspective of some is that the campground restricts public access to Hague Point, while others see the campground as providing access to certain residents that would not otherwise have the chance to experience the waterfront through the camping experience. Local business representatives and campers indicate that the campground supports many local stores and would foresee an impact to those businesses if the campground were no longer available. Whereas some groups indicated that campground operations currently negatively impact the environment, the camping group stated a willingness to work with others and learn how they can help the township meet its environmental objectives. 6 municipalities across Ontario, along with Orca, were contacted to discuss their experiences in operating campgrounds. Most reported similar challenges that are found with the Lakefield campground, such as cost of upgrading or replacing infrastructure, contributions to tourism and economic development, and so forth. A few municipalities that had previously tried third-party management found that their municipalities themselves were best positioned to deliver that service and could generate the best return on investment. And therefore, they reassumed operations of their campgrounds. Of note, we intentionally contacted one municipality that closed their campground last year as part of this benchmarking exercise so that we could understand their experience and their rationale for doing so. So now towards the back end of our presentation, the following slides will present a high-level overview of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats based on what we have learned thus far through research and consultations carried out thus far. Please note, however, that these findings are considered preliminary and are being presented simply for information, since consultation findings are still being reviewed and any input provided today through council will also need to be taken into account. For option one, the primary advantage of this competitive bid option is that a third party may be able to operate the campground more cost effectively than the township, and there would likely be minimal effort on the part of the township from a staffing perspective. With continuity of campground operations, economic spending attributable to campers would continue, and the township could ensure that its core values and expectations are reflected in a refreshed operating agreement. In terms of disadvantages, we heard through certain consultations that private business might place greater value on maximizing profit compared to community interests. Further, the township may not be able to easily influence business decisions after the agreement is in place. With respect to option two, the potential to outsource management to Orca has similar circumstances to pursuing an agreement with the private sector, but it does provide some notable advantages. One, Orca has demonstrated experience in operating campgrounds. Its organizational mandate is centered upon conservation and sustainability, and Orca owns Imagine the Marsh. This presumably creates a strong incentive for Orca to manage a campground in a manner that does not adversely impact the adjacent wetland. Orca may also be able to deliver complementary nature-based programming to campers and the public by virtue of the location. And as a public agency, its profits, as well as the share of revenues provided back to the township, would presumably be reinvested back into public services and community infrastructure. The partnership and community development model is also consistent with the recreation services plan, whereby the township can focus on the provision of space more so than the delivery of service or programs. It also bears noting we had a preliminary conversation with Orca as part of our benchmarking, and they express an interest and willingness in continuing dialogues with the township, should the township feel that's an option you wish to proceed with. For option three, if the Parks and Recreation Department were to assume day-to-day operations of the campground, the township would have an ability to dictate business operations and practices to a greater extent than an outsourced model, while also being entitled to all operating profits or losses. While some elements of a campground operation might be able to be assumed under the department's current staffing, it is likely that additional staff resources would be required if the campground is to provide a strong experience and position itself for success through customer service, advertising and promotion, and enforcement of campground rules. With respect to in the event that the township no longer wishes to operate the Lakefield campground, it would no longer need to reinvest in the aging infrastructure, but it still would need to direct capital towards site decommissioning, site remediation, and redevelopment of the land as a public park or other use that is ultimately envisioned. While this could increase the amount of parkland available to the public and minimize certain impacts on adjacent natural areas depending on the use, this option would also remove a level of service that has been provided for over 70 years, would result in the loss of revenue historically provided to the township, and could have an impact on local businesses based on the feedback that we received from EDBC and Kawartha Chamber of Commerce. So in an attempt to compare the options with each other, because the SWOT and criteria are some are consistent and some are a little bit different, we organized the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats under 6 categories as follows. The first being fiscal and economic impacts, environment and sustainability, transparency and accountability, business operations, staffing implications, and ability to be integrated with other public services. Based on the groupings, our preliminary analysis shows that each option has at least one category that would provide maximum benefit potential. Based on the analysis, the Orca option would appear to contribute the most benefits to the community, as it would potentially balance environmental concerns of operating a campground. Excuse me. Orca's public accountability, existing organizational infrastructure to staff the campground, and its historical relationship with the township may suggest an alignment with public values. So based upon the preliminary analysis, the options can be ranked according to that fundamental decision that will need to be considered by Township Council, and that being, should the Township of Selwyn be in the campground business? If the township chooses to remain in the business of providing a campground in Lakefield, the preliminary analysis suggests that outsourcing to Orca, followed by the private sector, could provide a greater net benefit than the Parks and Recreation Department operating it. Again, at a very high level and preliminary level. If council decides that a campground should no longer be provided as a municipal level of service, the study option would be to cease operations, decommission the site, and repurpose the lands. So our next steps are to really look to you as council today, receive any questions and comments from yourselves to inform the refinement of the preliminary SWOT analysis that we've carried out. We will continue to evaluate the community consultation that the survey just closed this past Friday. So making sure that we continue to go through that information as well to consider it in addition to your comments. But really hoping from council today, if you have a sense to provide us with whether or not those preliminary options, ranking of options feels right based on what you heard today, as well as, potentially, is there an option that resonates strongly with yourselves based on what you've heard? And conversely, is there an option that we might be able to safely take off the table today? This would be very helpful for us to understand moving forward. So our next steps after today are to undertake the identification of those preferred options, and develop the Lakefield campground study. In June, we would come back to yourselves for a subsequent presentation and then initiate the public commenting period. And then finally in July, after we have heard from the community and had a chance to consider those comments in finalizing the campground study, we would come back to you to seek your consideration. So with that, that concludes our slideshow. So I will stop my screen share and turn the floor back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to council in just a minute, but I just on a point of clarification. So when you go to next steps and you're talking about June of 2021, so what you've said, if I heard you correctly, is when you as a organization would make a recommendation to council, there would be a period of time for the public to provide its input on that recommendation prior to council making a decision. So whatever you suggest before council acts on it, the public will have a chance to weigh in on what it feels about your suggestion.
That is absolutely correct. So in June, once the draft study has been prepared and council has been updated, again, by virtue of a similar presentation as today, the public would be able to review the draft study, provide us with comments, and we would undertake, an analysis of how those comments affect the draft study. And then we would come to council in July with the final report.
Thank you for the clarification. I will turn it over to Anita. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to make, Anita, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Anand, for your presentation. It was very helpful. I would have liked to have received the slide deck that you were talking about, that you were just presenting a little bit sooner. I know that you're probably under a time crunch. So with regards to your, I think it was your last slide, you asked for comments with regards to the next steps and the ranking. At this point, because I haven't really had a chance to complete, I loved your presentation, by the way, but I would like to have a little more time to think about these next steps ranking. So I also want to thank all the people who have submitted comments and phone calls to date. We've received a lot of emails and phone calls and things like that. So I do want to thank everybody out there, whether they're on one side or on the other side. It's important for us as council to know that. One of the comments was that with regards to the survey questions, they felt that there was quite a bit of bias towards more or less maintaining the campground. And of course, whether one person could answer the survey questions 4 or 5 times, and I understand about IP addresses and all that. So I just wanted to bring that up, and I'm sure you've heard similar comments with regards to the survey. As our mayor pointed out, I've been telling people that this really is just the beginning. It's not the end. The initial survey has been put out there, and that there's still a lot of work to be done before council makes a decision. I'm happy to see that so many stakeholders were consulted. I think that really makes for a more fulsome and well-rounded I'm not sure what the word is, but anyway, it makes it much more well-rounded. I was wondering, I want to also thank you for the case studies that were in your interim research report. I think that was really important to sort of get a handle on how other municipalities have dealt with this a similar type of situation. In the future, are you going to be doing any number crunching with regards to the income versus a potential cost with the number of seasonal sites that are there and the amount of money that they pay, just specific to that? I know that there's been talk of a lot of infrastructure costs potentially down the road, but will you be doing any kind of number crunching in a future report? And I think that's all.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Locke, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I'll start with your last question with respect to the number crunching. We are working with township staff to determine at a high level what the operating impacts could be if the department were to assume operations. From a financial side of things, revenues and expenditures, if proceeding with an ORCA or a private sector agreement, would really be subject to the terms of those agreements. And so that is kind of the next step, right? We're not at the end of the beginning, or however the mayor put it. There is still some work to be undertaken, but we are undertaking a scan of high level operational impacts. With respect to the survey and the consultations in general, I do believe that this was this provided an opportunity for anybody that had an interest in this study to contribute, whether they were project stakeholders, whether they were members of the public at large, your advisory committees, and so on and so forth. It's clear people have different visions at this point in time for the campground site. And so we would reinforce, and we have been reinforcing to folks, that really the purpose of the consultations is to help us better understand, how the public and stakeholders feel about each option being considered. With the survey, it's important to also remember what the purpose of this study is. The terms of reference, the purpose of this study was established so that the township could confirm or reconfirm its role in an existing level of service. And therefore, the question did ask questions about your current campground operation. For example, if we found that nobody is camping, that would lend very strong insight to a cease operating the campground option, for example. So, we feel that we had a very strong response from the survey. We have, again, since Friday, over the last couple of days, we've been reviewing each of the responses that have been identified. We are very confident. I mean, we looked at IP addresses, and duplicate IP addresses accounted for a very small percentage of the total sample. There were instances where surveys were, maybe someone completed only one question, the first question, and abandoned the survey. There weren't very many of those instances, but those have been factored in and accounted for accordingly, as well as some people indicated that they provided multiple responses to us. And so, in instances like that, we can understand, who contributed more than once, why they did it. And again, it was not, it did not affect the 1,300 responses in any meaningful way.
Thank you. Okay, Deputy Mayor Senes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thank you for your presentation today. A lot of good information that we are receiving. So the size of the entire property is 30 acres. The size of the trailer park is 12 acres, which leaves a remainder for public use of 18 acres. For many years, there's been relative harmony with something for everyone to enjoy. There's the trail, Imagine the Marsh, Marshland Center, Douglas Park with the ball diamond and the washrooms, the tennis courts, the beach, a play and shade area, and the Lakefield Campground, where we receive revenue and local business receives revenue from the campers. I'm suggesting perhaps the setup of trailers needs to be reconfigured if we decide to go that route. I like the suggestions that we've received from some of the public that the trail signage needs updating, fix up the entrance and update historical information, and the dock should be inspected now and removed if styrofoam is present. And I think all those things should be done separate from what we're doing with the survey. They should be looked after prior to any decision made as to what direction we go. Council, and I'm saying this for the people who are listening in on the phone, is tasked with making decisions that are for the best of all the residents of the township after we received all the facts to enable us to make our decisions. We aren't there yet. As Andy has said, we haven't received all the information. We're partway through the process. And I wanted to mention that the revenue that is received from the trailer park does help to defray the costs for our parks, thereby keeping it off Selwyn resident tax bills. That would amount to about a 1% tax increase if we didn't have those revenues. To get to a final decision, we need a business case for each scenario with the projected revenue and expenditures, with the exception of the township run option 3. I believe we should take that off the table now. I don't think we should be in the business of employees managing the park. So if I don't know whether I have to make a motion to do that, Mr. Mayor, or I'll leave it until everyone else has had a chance to make comment.
Let's everybody make comments and then return back to how we want to dispose of that idea.
Thank you.
Okay, Anand, did you want to comment on the Deputy Mayor's comments?
Apart from, I think her observations are generally correct. I think, the campground does, contribute revenue in its present operations, whereas certain other community services, tend to be subsidized. The observation that there are other opportunities at the park or at Hague Point are correct. But we also have heard from groups and certain folks that they feel that the park is getting busier and the trail is getting busier. And so, in hearing what Councillor Senes has to say, I would generally agree with everything that she mentioned.
Thank you. And next we're going to Jerry. Yeah.
If I'm at work and my apology, I've been listening but trying to get some stuff done, and I've literally just had a team come in now. Can I defer to Donna first if I could, just to get these guys taken care of?
No problem, Jerry.
Thank you.
Donna? You go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks for the presentation. I've read most of the responses or letters that have come to council, and a lot of them are commenting on the environmental aspect of the park, or the trailer park, right? And the appearance of it. So I was just wondering if we reduce the camping footprint somewhat. I don't know by how much. We have 117 sites now. Could we reduce it somewhat and still have it financially viable? And then also, I know that some of the trailer parks in Ennismore and elsewhere are asking for a certain age of trailer and a certain size of trailer. And if that was done, I know it's a little discriminatory, but it is being done. That would also improve at least the appearance of the park. So that's, I guess, double-edged question.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I think first, in terms of the viability, if reducing the number of sites, so certainly we've seen some of the municipal comparators that are operating smaller campgrounds, but certainly you'd have to look at, again, the details in a little bit more closer level of scrutiny. With respect to the environmental concerns raised by the groups, I mean, they appear to be valid. The campground in Hague Point sit adjacent to a provincially significant wetland. I guess, while we were not, required to do any kind of compliance audit or anything like that, presumably through a new operating agreement, if the township were to, continue campground operations, one would presume that, the requisite compliance checks, the monitoring, would adherence to any kind of rules or bylaws governing appearance of the campsite, code of conduct and behavior, those would be addressed. And again, I don't know if that would address all environmental concerns. Certainly, just by virtue of the fact that there is an activity occurring on Hague Point will have some sort of impact on adjacent lands. I think there, again, when you go back to a double-edged sword kind of thing, there are, kind of pros and cons or issues and opportunities and potential solutions, but those would have to be considered to a greater extent. I think the question again about the financial viability, just going back to that a little bit, and really either the size of trailers and whatnot, what we are hearing from other municipalities in the review of trends, if trailers were to continue, people are looking for, the trailers today are a little bit bigger than they were 30 years ago, for example. And so they might have higher power requirements, which might require, increasing your amperage, for example, your electrical services. Maybe that could be done as part of an infrastructure renewal project, since certain components are aging. But yeah, I mean, I think some of the comments or questions really could potentially be addressed through, again, what that future vision for the land is, if it is a campground, if it could be reconfigured, and what are the kind of operational implications of that, as well as some of those kind of environmental or aesthetic concerns that have been raised.
Just to follow. And I also would be in favor of taking the option of having the township operate the campground, take it off the table. I don't think that would be a viable option. We have all kinds of operational issues now, and it would mean hiring more staff and a lot more work. So I would be in favor of taking that one off the table as well.
Thank you, Donna. As I mentioned to Sherry, we'll come back to that after everybody's had an opportunity to weigh in. And did you have anything else, Donna, or is that it for now? You're good? Okay. Jerry, are you able to There's
Yep,
Judy.
through you, as good as I get this time of year, Andy. So again, sorry, and I'm trying to work and do this at the same time. So just quickly, I just want to touch on the survey. I know you and I had spoke when at the joint trail and PRAC meeting. What about data? Does it cover data? You say you can track the IP addresses. What about data if I use my phone?
So I guess I'm not completely clear on what you're asking.
So if I wasn't
in
hooked up
terms
to
of data.
Wi-Fi, yeah. So if I wasn't hooked up to Wi-Fi on my phone, and I just went data and just went and did the survey, and then filled it out on my phone, because again, it's data, it's not connected to Wi-Fi, there's no IP address. How do you track that?
Yeah, I mean, everything shows up as an IP address
Does it?
for us.
Okay, all right, fair
yeah.
enough. Fair enough. Just curious on that one. So, you know, we've got 1.5 times the parkland per capita already. So, you know, we are situated pretty nice with parkland right now. And I don't know how much the people get out to see the other parklands that we do have available within the township, or whether they're just sticking to Lakefield and they don't know about the Ennismore waterfront. They may not know about the new trail from the 5th line down to the creamery there, stop in and get an ice cream cone at Central Smith. You know, I don't even know if they're aware of that and that there's going to be another extension. So maybe the onus is on us as a township to maybe promote that better than what we do. So, I mean, there's a ton of parkland. There's more parkland coming with some other developments. So a couple more comments and an idea I would like to throw at you. As far as the survey goes, back to that, everyone says it's slanted. So to you, being in this business, and for every single survey you say, they're saying it's slanted the other way. How do you... I guess it doesn't matter. You've been doing it long enough that either way, the other guy says it's slanted towards him. So the question I've got is, the economic impact of a campground. It can be established based on 200 and some odd trailers. There's a mathematical formula to it, but there's also a mathematical formula to the economic impact of a park. No different than an economic impact of a sidewalk. If you put a sidewalk leading to downtown, typically there bring more people walking downtown because it's safer. Therefore, there's an economic impact. I'm not looking for the answer today because you know you wouldn't have it off your head unless you're really good. But what's the economic impact of a park versus the campground? Something down the road.
Well, and I think it can be viewed as not necessarily either or. I think you're correct when you say they both have, you know, they could both potentially have a positive impact on the economy. You know, again, depending on the type of park and the foot traffic that it generates, or if you're marketing that park on a more broader regional basis, it could have kind of tourism related implications. So it really does depend on the type of park. And you'll see, right? Like, I mean, the Robert Young Sports Complex in Ennismore, I mean, a very different park than it's been a few years since we looked at all your parks, but compared to one of your smaller parks, you know, clearly there's a difference there from a tourism, sport tourism, and even just a community use, like as a critical mass. So, you know, I also, you know, I think it's also important to recognize that parks also could, you know, the value of parks isn't only measured in dollars and cents as well, right? I mean, you know, there's an emotional, a spiritual kind of intrinsic value that parkland contributes, the fresh air that we breathe and whatnot, the activity and exercise that people are able to gain, and just being outdoors has a value. But that being said, you know, right now your campground is a park use, you know, as it is. So yeah, as much as we like to think we're really good, and we are, you know, in my humble opinion, you know, I can't put a dollar and cents figure on it, but I can say at a high level, you know, either option, you know, has the potential to benefit your community financially as well as, you know, intrinsically.
Okay, thank you. And Lord knows this crap we've been going through for the last year, getting outside is not a bad go if it ever stops raining. So the question I've got is, I received a call, and I don't know if he sent the email into to you folks or to the township. So I'm going to throw this bomb out there. What if the township, and I guess I'm looking for your feedback or just to throw it into the mix of maybe an option. I don't know. What if the township decided to design a building, to say a multi-unit building, design it, plan it, get the site plan done, the whole 9 yards, it's a package, and then sell it to a developer. And then now we're out of the property. We've got a building that we want because we've designed it, and it's either you take this or you don't get the deal. What are your thoughts on that? Have you seen that before? Is that something to consider? And basically now we're out, we're getting the revenue. We make that one-time hit on the property sale. We've got the internal taxes that come in. Thoughts?
So it's not really something that's been on our radar up until this point. There certainly are examples of municipalities that have, I guess, tried to build parks that are complementary with their built environment. But one would have to really, well, again, there are certain environmental constraints and whatnot that would need to be investigated. But from a planning perspective, Councillor Heron, I don't have enough information. I don't think that I could comment on whether this would be a good idea or not, like as a residential kind of or a mixed use type of built development.
And that's fair. I know I just threw it at you today, but is that something maybe at your next time you can come, you could give me a brief synopsis on? Because it's got legs, it's an idea. It's another option that hasn't been explored, as you said, rather than Campground Park. We've got maybe a third option in there. I don't know. I'd like to hear about it.
Councillor, perhaps I could sort of jump in with on this one. Really, the designation of the lands right now would not permit that type of land use. So you would have to go through a typical official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, likely, some sort of site plan approval process, and working with a private developer or private interest to see if there is a need or an interest in purchasing the land, and what kind of agreements you would have in place to require them to develop what you sort of envision. But it is, it's looking at, I guess, higher and best use of the land. At the same time, there's a significant public consultation process that would take place in particularly the official plan and zoning amendment stage to get approval. You'll be looking at setbacks from environmentally sensitive areas, floodplains, and so forth. So the amount of land that would be available for development could be limiting for certain types of land uses. So it is, I suppose it is an option, not one, as Anand has mentioned, that we have looked at. Part of that is because of the way that the service delivery review was identified the 5 options there. But at the same time, it's an option that would require a fair bit more public consultation if council wanted to go in that direction.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I get all the ins and outs, but luckily enough, I know a guy by the name of Rob Lamar who could probably navigate, I'm hoping, maybe through the whole process there of everything like that. So just throwing it out there for discussion. And that's it for me, Andrew.
Thank you, Jerry. Just before I make my comments, I think Anita wants to say something.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe Rob, you can answer this. Wasn't there a proviso in the original deed or title to the land that the land was always to stay in public ownership as opposed to being sold off? I'm just trying to remember what the original deed for the purchase document said.
Rob?
Yeah, so I can't honestly say that I remember. That's the last time I looked at anything like that. It's been quite some time. So I don't know if there's some restrictive covenant that would preclude us from exploring the option. Perhaps if we retained ownership and we did some other agreement where the land was leased, that sort of thing, we might be able to get around some of those constraints. But in terms of whether or not this is a viable solution, I think both Todd and Anand kind of spoke to some of the headwinds, right? So certainly official plan, zoning, site plan approval would be part of the mix. There are some constraints on the property. There is a, provincially significant wetland that would have to be further studied to establish its exact boundary. And there are some floodplains as well that really impact on the developable area on the property. I have no doubt that there is, quite a there's some acreage, I'm sure, that could be considered developable, but there would be, quite a process, right, to get to understand exactly what that is. And then I guess to Todd's point, there would be some need, I think, to broach the issue with the general public. Right? We could conceivably look to see if we could find the deed that you're referring to, Anita, to see what sort of constraints there might be there. But I can't say that I remember them altogether.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, I've got a few questions, so I'm going to dig in here and just give me a second. Okay, good. So to the point that was just discussed, all of the options that you're reviewing all result in that property continuing to be held in public hands by the township. Nothing in those options take that out of the public realm, correct?
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. There would be nothing that would suggest you would sell that land to somebody else.
And the current environmental protection to Imagine the Marsh and the wetlands, none of the proposals that are currently on the table would impinge on any of those protections.
That would be correct. The options, and you as a municipality, for whichever you would select, you would make that explicitly clear that they would comply with environmental provisions.
And any of the options that are being considered maintain the public access to that space in the corridor that goes around the point. Nothing is being suggested that would impede or impair the public's access to that portion, correct?
That is correct. I mean, if anything, we're looking at the existing footprint and making our determinations based on the understanding that there would be no public, any restrictions imposed on the public as a result of the options.
On the issue of the survey, and because I've seen the comments too, it's a fixed survey. I got to say, if anybody had the intent of fixing it, they sure didn't do a very good job, because the results are absolutely mixed. And if it says anything, it says that there's a wide variety of opinion in the township. That's, to me, without getting into the particulars, that's what it says. Would you not agree?
That would be our impression as well. And again, from what when in speaking to the others that have been in this situation, campgrounds can be somewhat I guess, what's the word, polarizing, can be a polarizing topic in certain communities. But we would agree that it does not appear that the survey has been skewed by any one particular group.
And I think it's important to remember, if I could just mention this here, a little bit of an editorial comment. As a council members, and my colleagues can disagree with me if they choose to, we're going to take a wide variety of input, all kinds of different input that's coming to us, from somebody who picks up the phone and gives us a call, somebody who sends us an email, from your work that you're doing, from the survey. There isn't one specific thing that is paramount. It's a combination of information. At the end of the day, what we want to do is make an evidence-based decision based on the facts and based on what the information that we're being provided. And so I just want everybody to understand that our intent is to give everybody an opportunity to have their perspective heard, and that as a council, we'll consider it. At the end of the day, we'll make a decision. And the one thing I can say with some certainty, given the diversity of opinion that survey says, that no matter what we were to decide, somebody's going to not agree with that decision. It's just inevitable, because there's such a wide variety of opinion out there. But you don't need to comment on that. That's just a bit of editorializing on my part. I just wanted to explore a couple of things here. So on the cost of decommissioning, if that's the route that we decided to go on, that decommissioning cost really would fall on the township. There's no magic pot of money that you can access to get that. That's a township cost if we choose to do it, right?
That would be my understanding. I mean, again, as the owners of that land, and if you're converting it to another use, you'd be responsible for, making sure the land is in good order before it's converted to whatever use is ultimately determined there.
Okay. And if you went the other way and you were wanting to, and Lane may want to jump in on this one, and you wanted to upgrade the water, sewer, and electrical, would it be similar to what happens when you go into a subdivision and say put in new water and sewer? The cost of putting that in isn't borne by the general taxpayer. It's borne by the actual people that use the water and sewer. So if you have a new subdivision and there's 90 homes going in there, the cost of the water and sewer gets charged up to those new homes that are coming online. And either to you and or to Lane that's on there. Would that be the same thing here, where if we had to make an investment, that investment would obviously over a period of time, over 5 or 10 years, actually be charged to the users of the park through the fees that they pay?
So I'll take a crack at that, Mr. Mayor, and then let Mr. Vance jump in if he sees fit. So what certain municipalities have done is they've, from an electrical standpoint, for example, hooked up meters to each one of their sites. And so the camper is responsible for paying their electrical bill per se. So it's not absorbed within the overall campground budget per se. The municipality collects that fee on top of its campground fees. With respect to the actual extension and funding of the infrastructure, most municipalities would just as with your arenas, for example. I mean, a portion of that, could be tax funded, but a portion of that could be, funded through user fees or even surcharges, for example, whether temporary or permanent in that respect. So, that would be kind of our observations there. Lane, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add there.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Definitely a number of different funding options. With respect to hydro specifically, we do have, that would be an investment in public lands, right? So that's the whole point, is owned by the municipality. So with respect to hydro, any type of capital investment, if we were to invest in it, we do have a campground reserve that we could fund that investment from. With respect to water and sewer, if we treated it as an extension of our utility, then we have a user pay funded system for water and sewer. That type of capital investment could be treated very similar to a local improvement or a special charge, where we would fund that internally with an interest component, and then basically that would be repaid over a number of years, and we could use that operating fee to pay back those improvements as well. So it definitely wouldn't have to come from taxpayer dollars, and it could be funded internally and not actually cost anybody any additional funding.
So maybe when you're further developing the concepts, because I think it was Sherry that said we need to see financial analysis. So obviously, to get some sort of idea what the decommissioning costs would be, and then some sort of ideas on how we would fund any kind of infrastructure investment. I think that's important for council to know on both sides of that would be good. I've got a planning question here, and maybe Todd will take it, maybe Rob can take it. So many of the planning decisions that that impact that area would have been made under the regulatory regime that existed at the time those decisions were made. So if you decided to do something in 1998, the basis on which the approvals would have been provided would have been the regulations that were in place in 1998. And their grandfather is not dissimilar to our issue now, that if you already owned a building that was within 100 meters, you don't have to pull the building away 100 meters of the shoreline. You don't have to pull the building out. you just can't get any closer. But I don't know if it's the right phrase to say a legal non-conforming, but the house was put there at the time when it was okay to put it there. Because the rule has changed, you don't have to remove the house. Am I right on that? The decisions that were made about that park would have been made consistent with the regulatory regime in place at the time those decisions were made.
Yeah, I can answer that, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so absolutely, yeah, when we make decisions, they're predicated on the rules that apply when we make them. And yeah, often over time, those rules change as we learn a bit more about the impact that, say, development has on wetlands, and we increase the setback, say, as for instance. And you're right, in that context, we look at things going forward. The decisions that we make are not typically retroactive. Actually, we're prevented from making them retroactive. So if you built something that was okay in a particular setting at a particular time, then it's okay in perpetuity unless you want to make changes, right? So even if we change them, so that concept is correct.
So on the other hand, though, if you wanted to do something new, you'd have to conform to the rules as they exist today, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so I'm just trying to see if I had anything else. As I just wanted to pick up on something Anita said. You were working on this right to the last minute, and I appreciate that. So obviously, if council members, when they're going through it in more depth, if they have questions, we'll forward them to you. And I suspect we'll get questions. This is a public document, so members of the public may have questions as well. So we're going to do our very best to answer those questions. So I'm going to do three things before we close the meeting off. I'm going to return to Sherry's comment and see if there's a consensus to take that option off the table. Then I have some closing comments I want to make in terms of this part of the meeting. And then I am going to do the Q&A section of the meeting, because we do have a question and answer period. And last count, we had 18 questions, so we'll do our best to answer those. So let's council return to Sherry's point, which I think Donna echoed, which was so that we're not doing, I think the concept behind this would be, if we're really not that interested in the township running the campsite directly, do we want to take that option off the table? So Sherry said she would think that we could do that. Donna agrees. Anita, do you have any thoughts on it?
Well, I'm inclined to say I don't agree with that. I know the village used to run the campground years and years ago. I think I'd want to see, I'd actually maybe like to hear from Lane if he has any thoughts on, the benefits or the, well, it's raining, the benefits or the cost, if it would be financially viable for the township to at least look at running the campground, or if he thinks it's throwing good money after bad.
Okay. I'm going to come to Lane in a second, but Jerry, did you have a thought on the issue of direct operation?
I do. Thank you. And through you, unfortunately, you guys weren't at the Park and Rec joint meeting, but Anand had made a great comment there that private sector is better, more nimble, I believe was the term he used, at running things as opposed to a township. The process is extremely long. Well, you got to get approval for this, approval for that, approval for that. Private sector could just go out and do it. So we're not in the trailer park business. I'd like that option to be taken off the trailer or off the table.
Okay. And Lane, did you want to take a stab at what Anita said, or is that too big a chunk to just answer all at once like that?
Yes, to you, Mr. Mayor. That's a pretty big question to answer for sure. I guess I would just agree with Jerry's summation of Anand's comment with respect to being nimble, and maybe the other would be that I think the expectations of a public sector entity in a enterprise like that somehow get ramped up. And that obviously then translates over into possibly increased costs as well. So obviously staff will review any direction that council provides, but I think I'm getting a feedback from council that maybe we don't even need to go down that road.
Anita?
Okay, thank you, Lane. Thanks, Jerry. I'll go along with Sherry and Donna.
Okay, so I think, colleagues, there's a consensus and a direction to our consultant to take that option off the table. Okay, I'm just going to make some closing comments, and then I'm going to go into.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Angie?
Sorry about that. Could we have an actual motion to remove that then from review?
Moved by Sherry, seconded by Donna. All those in favor? Sherry.
Thank you.
Okay, good that you're keeping us on track. Okay, so I'm just going to make a couple of closing comments on this section, and then I'm going to go to the Q&As. Okay, so first of all, I just want to make the point that council, and I hope everybody saw it today, really takes this responsibility serious. We know this is an important issue. We know there's passion and emotions that are strong on everybody on this issue, and council shares and understands it. I think it's really important, and people are doing this. It's just a reminder to keep doing it. Is that the way forward needs to be shaped by respect for everybody. Simply because somebody has a different opinion from me doesn't mean that person is bad or whatever. I just happen to disagree with the opinion, and that's great. That's the public discourse. But respect has to be there. I think it's also important, and I say this at all my public health press conferences, probably drive people to distraction. But I keep using the phrase about the importance of expressing kindness. This is a difficult time for everybody. There isn't a person who is listening to this meeting or watching it or is participating in it who is not being impacted by what we've been through as a community. COVID has been difficult for everybody. It puts people on edge. I consider myself fortunate in that I have all kinds of support to help me. And I understand there's all kinds of people who are facing far more challenges than me, but I don't think there's a person who hasn't been affected by it. So I think it's really important that we express kindness to one another. And it's also important, I think, that we need to try to the best that we can to find common ground, to find a way where we can satisfy the largest number of needs. That's a difficult process to go through because that by definition means I may not get 100% of what I want. Might only get 80% of what I want in order to make sure that somebody else gets something that they want. I'm hoping that we can land this some way like that. I know for myself, I'm going to try to take into account the best interest of our community, of our whole community. And that's everybody in the community, whether you've just arrived here or whether you've been here for generations, whether you live in the Lakefield ward or whether you live in the Smith ward or in the Ennismore ward, whether you're a person of significant means or a person of modest means, whether regardless of who you are, everybody and every view is important. And I am going to work hard to try to take that into account. For me, consultation is not just talking to people who you agree with, but it's also about talking to people who I don't agree with. That's true consultation. Just talking to the folks who reinforce what I think is not really having a conversation. And it's really important, in my view, to have an open mind to different perspectives. A genuinely open mind to hear what somebody is saying and have a willingness to consider it. At the end of the day, you may say, okay, I've heard it. I understand where you're coming from, but you haven't convinced me. But you have to have a willingness to listen to people who may not necessarily agree with you. As I said earlier, I want this decision. I think it needs to be evidence-based. It's got to not be on an opinion, not something you may have read on social media the other day. It's got to be evidence-based. And that's what we've got to make our decision on. And, you know, simply because I believe that something's true, that doesn't make it true. It's the facts that make it true. And I have to be very cognizant about that and to make sure that that's what I abide by. And so, you know, I'll finish this part because I am going to do the questions with exactly what I say at the end of all of my videos. And that's to stay safe, be well, and in all things, be kind. And so I want to thank our presenters today for their presentation. I'd ask that you stay on the line though for the questions, because some of these are these are all relevant to the work that you're doing. And so what I'm going to do is we're supposed to have a 15-minute question period. It's 5:15. I'm going to do the best I can to try to answer these in 15 minutes. And so, and I know my colleagues are rolling in their eyes. Andy, you've never used 5 words. You've always used 20 to say what you could do in 5, but I'll try to do the best I can. So anyways, Madam Clerk, you're going to help out by posing the questions.
That's correct. And in the interests of time, a number of the questions had some preamble. So I'm just going to do my best to get to the point of the question. So it won't be read as it was sent to me. So I just want those that are listening to be aware of that. So there are, the first question is from Donna Hayes. For those of us who use the park from May to October, it is our only home in Canada. What can we do to ensure that the park stays a campground for seasonals as we are so heavily invested?
Well, I think the answer to that is we're reviewing a series of options. Keeping it open is one of the options. So we're engaged in that. We're going to continue to receive more input on that. And what we're tracking for is to make a decision sometime in July.
Thank you. The next question is from Linda Gadd. How has it evolved that the campground is permitted to use the lands next to the walking trail? And how has it evolved that the campground is permitted to use their own docks when residents along Hague Boulevard have not been allowed to do the same? No matter the rightful owner of this perimeter, surely the same regulations will apply to everyone.
Okay, I think I'm going to let Mike take that one.
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Linda, for the question. Assuming that the first part of the question relates to the area known as the overflow camping. The overflow camping does not have any permanent services. It is used and has been used during peak times and not for the full season. These peak times generally are long weekends. The area can accommodate approximately 10 additional sites. The temporary camping uses uses are confined to the area between the campground, road, and the trail. Docks, on the other hand, in various forms, and the boat launch at the point have been present at the campground for decades. The docks currently in place are part of the campground operation. The operator is a legal entity and has insurance coverage for liability and other things. The docks that were removed along Hague that were adjacent to the cottages were privately owned on public property. Any liability for an incident that occurred on a privately owned dock on public property would mean that the township, and by extension the taxpayer, would assume all liability and risk. The township installed its own docks for rental to manage the liability and risk along that point and in front of those homes.
Thanks, Mike. Next question, Angie.
Thank you. Question 3, there's a concern that Curve Lake First Nation is an afterthought. This is based on a different font type that appears in an interim report that was provided to council. and that Curve Lake is not being consulted in a meaningful way. This question is from Guy Hanchett. What is the date and time for the consultation with Curve Lake First Nation?
I can assure you that that consulting with Curve Lake is not an afterthought. It's they have been engaged through the review. I'm advised that the CEO has had discussions with the acting chief operating officer. Understand our consultant is reached out to the community and will engage the community in part of the consultation, and to provide them with an opportunity to provide whatever input that they want to provide. Look, Selwyn and Curve Lake have been partners for generations in all kinds of things that we do. We're going to honor Curve Lake, and we're going to honor that history on this particular file. Next question.
Thank you. This question is from Norm Saltmanis. A draft plan of subdivision and application's been submitted by Triple T Holdings Limited to develop 966 units in Lakefield South. Basically, the concern is that this development will put pressure on our existing green space and the beach at the village of Lakefield. Does council foresee the need to restore Hag Point as a unique public park for all to be used 365 days of the year, as good planning and foresight to meet the intent of the official plan requirements for sustainable development and climate change mitigation? So essentially the question is the concern about the Lakefield development lands and how that will impact on the existing Hag Point.
Mike, why don't you do this one?
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Norm. Monteith Brown did an analysis of the parkland inventory as part of the Recreational Services Review in 2018. When that was completed, it was determined that Selwyn has 87.3 hectares of parkland, which includes the Hag Point property. In Ontario, parkland's level of service ratios are between 3 and 4 hectares per 1,000 people. The 2018 report showed that Selwyn's ratio is over 5.1 hectares per 1,000 people. Using the baseline for Ontario, Selwyn has 19 hectares more parkland per capita than the provincial standard. Even if the area currently used for camping, which is about 5 hectares, there is still surplus parkland based on the standard. Also, the current Triple T proposal is part of the area known as Lakefield South Development Area. Recognizing the significant amount of intensification in this area, a review of several township services areas, including parkland needs, were considered already. 6 acres of parklands are planned within this development area. The township is proud to have more parkland than the provincial standard, and the addition of more parkland when Lakefield South is developed will ensure that this surplus is maintained.
Thank you, Mike. Angie, next.
Thank you. The next question is from Ed Polensky, if I'm saying that correctly. Thank you. The Campground Utilization Study Interim Report dated April 29th provides very limited financial information that is needed to inform council on its decision. Residents are concerned about the lack of documentation and the operating costs and the projected infrastructure costs to the taxpayers. A full cost analysis is being suggested to inform sound decision-making by council. Will council request a detailed financial analysis of all projected direct and indirect costs to Selwyn Township over the next 20 years, including detailed infrastructure estimates to share with all taxpayers and to inform sound long-term decision-making?
Well, thanks for the question, Ed. I think you heard the conversation. Council has requested a financial analysis be done with the various scenarios that might be considered. So, thank you. Next question.
Thank you. The next question is another one from Linda Gadd. Given that the lands are devoid of human presence, sorry, I'm just trying to, her real question is, related to passive parkland, and what does this mean? How do you define passive parkland?
So Mike, what's our definition of passive parkland?
Okay, first, through you, Mr. Mayor, I want to thank Linda for another question. Passive parkland is defined as open spaces and trails. Parks that that have sports fields, soccer, baseball, courts, playgrounds, outdoor fitness equipment would be considered active parkland.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, Angie?
Sure. The next question is from Marlene Watson. She's a first-year camper in the Lakefield Park. I've been following both sides of the argument and agree with some, not all of the points presented. My question is, what or why did council come to the decision to not renew the contract to remain a campground?
Mike, maybe you can provide a little bit of that history?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Marlene, for the question. A review of the use of the property has been raised through past recreational department reviews and strategic planning reviews. So the public is asked about the uses of the property and whether there should be a campground, a different type of campground, or some other use. In addition, there are some infrastructure needs that we need to consider now. And before investing into any upgrades, it's important to know the answers to how property should be used. It is important that the campground operator and the campers be aware of the plans, which is why we made that decision last October.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Our next question, Angie?
Next question is from Steve Dejani. Why are people of the other group allowed to take pictures and encroach on our campsites? This group takes pictures of trees and sites. This practice has to be stopped and addressed.
Okay, well, let me start. And well, first of all, thanks, Steve, for the question. But let me just start with this. So, in my role as mayor, I work really hard not to divide people into groups. I see there's only one group here, and for me as mayor, and that's the residents of South. Every one of whom's needs are important, every one of whom's needs or every one of whom's perspectives is important. And I'm going to work hard, and I'm pretty certain I speak on behalf of all council, to consider everybody. In terms of the very specific questions, my understanding, the campground is adjacent to public land, and there's nothing to prevent anybody when they're in a public space, whether they're on the sidewalk or the road or whatever, of taking a photograph. But I just ask everybody, it's really important that we respect one another, respect each other in what we're doing. It's just critical to what we do. But folks, we're a community. We're a community, and we will work hard to find a solution that works in the best interest of this community. Thank you. Next question.
Next question is from Michael Chappell, professor at Ryerson University. He's been hearing a great deal of rhetoric about the issue and is trying to understand the benefits to me as a taxpayer, or to him as a taxpayer, pardon me. So will council consider the formation of a citizens representative group to review options and make final recommendations outside of the current adversarial process?
Thanks for the question, Michael. The decision rests with council. That's the process. Council will make that decision. We're charged to do it. The park is public land. It's part of the township. That's what we're charged to do. Yeah, I don't want the process to be adversarial, but what I do want to make sure is that everybody gets their say. And as a result of that, you're going to hear a variety of opinions. There are people who have totally different visions. Both of those folks, or both of those groups, have every right to have their vision heard and reflected upon. So at the end of the day, it's going to fall on council. We'll make the decision that we're charged to do, but we're going to do it in a way where we get to hear everybody. I don't want it to be adversarial. I want everybody to respect the fact that other people have a different opinion than they may have. But at the end of the day, we're determined to hear what folks have to say. Thank you. Next question.
Thank you. Next question is from Mary Smith. City of Kawartha Lakes has recently decided to decommission their campground, which was on public land at the Bob Cajun Beach. Has Selwyn Township staff or Monteith Brown contacted City of Kawartha Lakes to learn about their process and how they are proceeding to plan for the future of these lands?
Okay, Mike?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Mary. Monteith has reviewed other campground operations, which will be reviewed which were reviewed and discussed during today's meeting. The campground at Bob Cajun Beach was not reviewed at this point, but we can ask Monteith Brown to look into this for us.
Okay, thank you. So we will refer that to the consultant. Next question.
Next question is from Linda Saxby. Should taxpayers be expected to fund major capital investments to benefit primarily a private campground operator for what is noted as a return of $56,000? This is the revenue the township receives. Or should the parkland be used more appropriately in a different way as green space?
Okay, so Linda, thanks for the question. I think you probably heard if you're online, heard the conversation about council's request to hear what type of funding models would be used to if we chose to renew the infrastructure, and a range of options, so that similar to what happens in any other things we do, that it's the users of the specific service who bear the majority of the cost and not the general taxpayers. But as you heard, we've asked, as part of the additional work being done, to have that kind of model described to us. So next question.
Next question is from Alistair Ray. He notes that the interim study was helpful. There were some concerns about the density of sites in comparison to some of the other campgrounds noted in the report and compliance with MOU regulations. Does council agree that these aspects need to be considered in reviewing options, including reverting to public parkland? And can the consultant indicate how that might be done when making the recommendations?
Yeah, and again, thanks for the question. I believe it was Donna that raised that very issue about density. And so clearly that's one of the things that's being considered. And if a decision is made that it's to continue, then all of those other things that flow from that, such as density, would be part of that discussion. But I did note that Donna did raise that, and I think the consultants were listening and heard that. Next question.
The next question is in reference to the township's current licensing bylaw for trailer parks and trailer camps. The question is does the Lakefield Park conform with this bylaw, including various studies that need to be undertaken in order to expand boundaries and so on? Yeah, so basically the question is, does the Lakefield campground fall under the current trailer camp bylaw that's in place?
Well, it doesn't, and the reason it doesn't is because we actually have two different ways that we do it. So if it's a privately operated campground, then we have the bylaw that institutes the various the regulatory regime. In the case of this one, it's a publicly owned one, and we exercise that due diligence through the agreement that we have with the camp operator. So we have things in there like you need to have your insurance, you need to meet all the legal requirements for operating, and any of the other conditions that we currently have or may consider to have in a future future agreement. So what is in the bylaw for the privately held entities, we use through the agreement on the publicly held entity. Next question.
Thank you. Sorry, and that previous question, I think I neglected to say it was James Forrester who asked the question. So the next question is actually from Stephanie Ford Forrester. She's noting the example used in the interim report from Perth, the campground that was decommissioned. She's critical of the fact that we weren't aware that Bob Cajun had a similar situation where they closed their park, feeling it was incomprehensible that we didn't know about this. She also noted concerns about the survey as well. So her question is essentially, does council plan to base any part of its decision making on the statistics generated by an invalid survey?
Well, let me just try to deal with that. So first of all, on the Bob Cajun example, it clearly was missed, and we'll ask the consultant to take a look at it. I don't think there was anything nefarious about it. It got missed, and so we'll take a look at it. As to the survey, look, I've spoken to this a couple of times now in this meeting. The survey is one tool of many that council will use to take input. The survey didn't come out and favor one side or the other. It really, what it told me is that there's a variety of opinions that are out in the township, and many people chose to use it. That using a survey as a tool is something that firms like Monteith uses on a regular basis, and it's like anything. It's like any tool. It has its limitations, and I think as a council we understand that. But it does provide us some evidence, and we will incorporate that amongst the many of the things that we do in trying to arrive at a decision. Next question.
Thank you. Is from Leon Weiss. Would it not be both logical and judicious to leave the trailer park as is and permit those who wish to have a nature area formulate one between the tennis court, pickleball area, and the baseball diamond?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, and I appreciate the question, Leon, we're taking a look at a number of options, and we're going to go through that process. We'll take a look in July. Hopefully, that's our target, to trying to make a decision on which one we want to go to. Next question.
Thank you. It's from Ken Seam. So again, he's kind of talking about the pressures on the beach and the Marshland Center. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to the nub of the question here. Does the council foresee that the campground area would turn from a source of revenue for the township and community to financial and public liability, and that it would be more prudent to create new parkland where new neighborhoods are slated to be developed?
Okay, well, thanks for the question. I think Mike sort of touched on this. When the new subdivision is proposed, park areas are established within that new development. So for the one that is been recently advised, I think, Mike, you mentioned that it's 6 acres that is being considered as new parkland as part of Lakefield South. That 6 acre amount. I got that right. It is 6?
That's correct. Yeah. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So to answer your question, yes, that is what we do when we do new developments. Next question.
Thank you. The next question is from Carolyn Roden. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to the nub of the question. I think what she's concerned about is the current COVID restrictions, and a feeling that the campground is not even permitted to be open. Yeah, so I think the concern is that campgrounds are open and they're not allowed to be open under the provincial regulation, in her opinion.
Okay. Well, thanks for the question, Carolyn. In actual fact, under regulation 8220, updated in April, seasonal campgrounds are allowed to be opened, and that's the section 26(1) through 4. There are specific reasons for it. So if it's used by an individual who is in need of housing, or if it is permitted if somebody has a full season lease. Those campsites have to be serviced by electricity, water service, and facilities for sewage. All other recreational facilities are not allowed to be open. Second, under the stay-at-home order, which is under a different piece of legislation, and which is which is under Regulation 265.21, campgrounds, you are allowed to travel to a secondary residence, either for up to 24 hours to conduct essential activities. So that might be if you need to bring a contractor in to do a repair or whatever, or if you are relocating and you stay for a minimum of 14 days. So there is a regulatory regime that does allow for certain operation of campgrounds, even with the lockdown and stay-at-home orders in place.
Okay, we're on our last question. It's like the 12 days of Christmas. This question is from David Walsh, and it's submitted on behalf of the Lakefield Trail Stewardship Committee. Again, I think David's question relates to some earlier ones and the concern that COVID and new developments in the area, such as Triple T and the Lilac subdivision, are putting additional pressure on our green spaces. So essentially the question is, how do you plan to deal with the need for more parkland and green space in Lakefield? And would you consider this as an opportunity to address the issue? And that would be presuming that the campground would become parkland.
I'm going to let Mike finish off the questions with the answer to this one.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thank you, David, for the question. And as noted through similar question earlier, with the township plans for parklands in line with the recreational services study and its official plan. Yeah, using the provincial standard, Selwyn has 19 acres more parkland per capita than the provincial standard. Even if the area currently used for camping is removed from this number, which is approximately 5 hectares, there is still surplus parkland based on the standard. The township ensures that we maintain our parkland needs by also ensuring that when new developments are created, example, the Triple T subdivision, parkland and amenities are considered and are included in any new development. In the case of the Triple T, 6 more acres of parkland has been added to the town's parkland inventory, as previously stated by myself and by the mayor.
Thank you, Mike, for helping out on that. And thank you to all the residents who submitted questions. I have to beg the indulgence of my colleague councillors, because despite my best intention, I ran 10 minutes over on the question period, and I should have asked for leave to do that. So I wasn't watching the time, and my apologies to folks. Anyways, we will do our best to try to stick to the 15 minutes going forward. Now I have a ton of paper on my desk, so I got to go back and find the agenda here, which I just did. So we have no consent items. We have no council updates. We have no petitions. We have no new business. We have only a confirming bylaw that I need a motion to do with Donna and Anita. All those in favor? Carried. And just before I ask for a notice of adjournment, a motion of adjournment, I want to thank our presenters today for doing the presentation, for the work that they've done, and for the work that they will do, because it's a big job, and we are appreciative of the work that they're doing. I want to also thank all of the public who is in attendance. I don't know how many there are. I don't have that figure in front of me. I imagine there are a few. So thank you for your interest. I want to thank everybody who's contacted me over the last little while to provide their input. And as I said, we're desirous of hearing everybody's perspective. This is not about trying to just listen to one perspective. We want to hear from everybody. So I am going to move for an adjournment motion, which I think which Jerry was going to do. Oh, Anita, did you want to say something before adjournment?
Do we have to pass a motion to receive the presentation from Monteith Brown, or do we not need to do that?
Angie, that's a good point. Do we need to do that?
You can if you wish.
Okay, Anita was so moved, I think. Yes. And then Donna seconded. All those in favor to receive the report? Carried. Okay. Jerry, did you want to make a motion? Or adjournment? Okay. Seconded by Anita. All those in favor? We are adjourned, colleagues. Thank you, everybody, for all your hard work. We will see you soon. Bye-bye.